So is this clear to everyone? I think our number of questions have come. Okay, it's all yes. Okay. So we have understood how data can be broadly classified. Now we go to the next section. I hope the PowerPoint is visible. So these are the different types of biological data. So I have a question for you. Read the question. On the left hand side, you will get a question, a survey question. Read the question and find out the right option from the right hand side. Very soon a poll will appear on the screen and you have to click on the poll. You have to choose between A to E. So the question reads like this. Study the following survey question. Please mention your favorite subject in high school. Language, literature, biology, physical science, mathematics, history or geography. Now choose the correct response. This survey question is dealing with a nominal variable, an ordinal variable, a discrete variable, a continuous variable, and a circular variable. Now, Azhar or Saurabh, can you please turn on one poll so that they can choose between A to E?
Yes, sir, I'm on it. I'm just turning on the poll right now. The poll is live. Please choose the correct answer.
Hmm. So A is nominal, B is ordinal, C is discrete, D is continuous, E is circular. Okay, we have got 80 votes. More people are answering. I'm sharing the screen once again for those who need the options. A is nominal, B is ordinal, C is discrete, D is continuous, and E is circular.
Alright, sir. Do we need to show the results to everyone?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sir. I'm projecting the result.
So the result says that 82% of the respondents think that the option is A, 11% thinks it's B, and 7% thinks that it is option C. So let us get back to the question and see what the options were like. So we can easily understand here, we are talking about categories that cannot be added, subtracted, or whose mean cannot be found out. So obviously it is a categorical variable. It's not a numerical variable. Now between categorical variable, we have ordinal variable which can be arranged in an order and nominal variable which does not have any order. Now you can easily understand subjects cannot be arranged in an order. There is no intrinsic order. It's a matter of individual preference. So the list of subject, like list of language, list of religion, list of country, these are all examples of nominal variable. These are only names of the category that cannot be arranged in an order. So I hope the answer is clear to everyone why this one is a nominal variable. So the answer is a nominal variable. We come to question 2. Read this question clearly. It will be followed by a poll.
sir, let me know when to launch the poll.
Yes. Please launch the poll. So the question says, please mention your educational qualification: primary school, high school, graduation, post-graduation, doctorate. So the question is that the survey question is dealing with a nominal variable, an ordinal variable, a discrete variable, a continuous variable, or a circular variable.
Alright, sir, I am making the poll live right now.
Okay.
And while people are answering, there are a couple of questions in the question tab, like what is circular variable?
Yes, I know. I will come to that. Is there a certain questions coming up? We'll explain what is the importance of knowing these variables. And there was one question, how to represent data in accurate manner. That is our very next topic. And I will come to the discussion of a circular variable. So I'm sharing the screen once again so that you know which option stands for what. A is nominal, B ordinal, C discrete, D continuous, E circular. So 81 people have voted. So do we publish the results?
Alright, sir, publishing the results.
So as we can see, 80% people think it is option B, 11% think it's A, 7% think it's C, and 2% thinks it's D. So let us see which option is actually correct. Going through the options carefully, we will see we are dealing with names of certain levels like primary, high school, graduation. So as I told you, you ask this question first. Can we add these parameters or find average of the parameters? The answer is no. We cannot add them. We cannot subtract them. We cannot find a mean. So it is definitely not a numerical variable. If it is not numerical, the question of discrete and continuous does not arise. Now the question is, so it must be a categorical variable which answers a category. But is that category randomly arranged, that is cannot be arranged, or can it be arranged from ascending to descending or descending to ascending? Obviously this can be arranged in an order. So actually I have already arranged it. From primary school to doctorate level is an ascending order of qualification. So it is an ordered variable, but the gap between the orders are not same. The difference between primary school and high school is not same as the number of year that you spent between high school and graduation. So that way the gaps are unequal. So it's a categorical variable, but they can be ordered. So it is an ordinal variable. The answer is B, ordinal variable. I hope this is clear. We move on to the third question, question number 3. Many questions, you will see many survey questions use coding system with numbers. They do not have places for writing a lot and they only have coding systems. So suppose this is a coding system that the form is asking you to fill up according to. So now based on this, you choose the correct response. Azhar, you can also start another poll. So people are still voting. We'll wait. I'm showing the screen once again. So 76 people have voted so far. Azhar, can we display the results? Am I audible? Okay. So can we publish the results?
Yes, sir. I had already published the results. I can do it once again. Just
Okay.
there you go.
Okay. I think 41% have voted for A, 2% for B, 56% for C, and 1% for E. I didn't even discuss circular variables. Anyway, so let us come to the discussion as to see which one is correct. Now, see, when you deal with this kind of data where uh, a word is represented by a number, like the word female is represented by 01, male by 02, other by 03. So when you get such numerical representation of words, it's very commonly confused with numerical data. But you understand very clearly. What is the first question that we should ask ourselves? The first question is, can these values be meaningfully added, subtracted, or averaged? Can I average female and other to get a male? That sounds absurd. Or can I think that a male is equal to two female and other is equal to one male plus one female, or is equal to three females? That also does not make sense. So although these are represented by numbers, the numbers are actually used here as words or codes. They are not used as numerical variables. It is like attributing someone with a roll number. A roll number cannot be added. I mean, if there are three people sitting side by side, irrespective of their roll number, randomly, the average of two roll number will not be the middle roll number. It doesn't happen that way. So here I could have also written that in place of female, you write F, in place of male, you write M, in place of others, you write O. That is exactly similar as 1, 2, and 3. So here 1, 2, and 3 are basically shorthand representatives of words, not numbers. And that way, it is a categorical variable. Now you think, is there actually any order in which gender can be arranged? Of course not. So we cannot arrange gender in a particular order of superiority or inferiority. So obviously now it becomes a nominal variable, not even an ordinal variable. So although there are numbers and the numbers can be arranged sequentially, it is only a way of plotting the words in small hand. So it is actually a nominal variable. This example I personally kept because in many survey forms, you will find instructions like this, where a number has to be placed. So do not get confused by the fact that a number means numerical data. A number can also represent categorical data. So look into what this number is representing. Are the gaps between the numbers equal? Can they be added, subtracted, and averaged? If the answer to all these are no, then it is definitely not a numerical data you are dealing with. So I think I'm clear with this, that this was actually not a numerical data. It's a nominal categorical data. Now, there is another kind of scoring scale you will find being used in social sciences, psychology, and even in medicine. So, you ask a question and then you ask the person to tick on a category like strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, no opinion, somewhat agree, and strongly agree. Like if the question is, I'm easygoing, so which one do you think you match with? Or I have high standards, which category do you think you fall into? So these are kind of items that we also test as part of questionnaires. The same thing can also be written in this manner. Sometimes it is written in this manner. So here also you see a whole sentence is replaced by a number. It does not necessarily mean that it is a numerical data. So here 1 represents does not correspond at all. 2 represents something between does not correspond and corresponds a little. 3 represents something between corresponds a little and corresponds moderately. So you understand this is how the data is placed in space. And the numbers are only abbreviations of a long sentence. So these are also ways in which data can be collected, and these data are called Likert items. There may be 5 checkboxes, 7 checkboxes, or even 10 checkboxes against each question. Now, you will also see that by adding up this, many data are generated. Like out of the 7 question, you can score adding your scores and then reach a conclusion. Many scales like the depression scales, anxiety scales use Likert items like this, and based on this, we find out the average score. So that means it is representing a category, but it can also be added. In that case, we have a statistical dilemma. So how should we treat Likert score? Do we treat them as categorical variable like age, like sex, like language, like religion? Or do I treat them as numerical variable like height, weight, pH? This is a question I'm placing to all of you. So you can write C for categorical and N for numerical in the chat box. If you think it can be categorical, write C. If you think it can be numerical, you can write N. Okay, we have got quite a few responses. So I'll try to answer this question. This question is practically challenging because this is a question which creates debate even among statisticians. Let us look at one of the scales very carefully and see where the exact dilemma lies. So if we are dealing with a scale like this, we can add up and find out whether the person has correspondence or no correspondence to a particular data. Now, the problem is that this Likert scale has an order. So it is definitely an ordinal data. Like you can actually arrange that in ascending and descending order. The problem that occurs from using this as numerical data is same as the problem you get in rank. For example, when I say, suppose in this one, when I say strongly disagree is 1 and somewhat disagree is 2, no opinion is 3, somewhat agree is 4, and strongly agree is 5. Now the difference between strongly disagree and somewhat disagree may not be same as the difference between somewhat agree and strongly agree. The gaps may not be equal because these are subjective decisions. So this tells us that we actually cannot use them as numerical data. It should be categorical. But there is a but coming here. Suppose there are 10 such questions. Now for each question you have a score. You add up all the score and find out your total score. Now suppose in this questionnaire only, we can see that there are 6 questions, each having 5 options. Now if the options are numbered as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, then obviously the minimum score can be 0, where you are clicking 0 for all the option, and the maximum score can be 4 into 6, that's 24. That means any other person by random permutation combination can have any score between 0 to 24. So although the individual items have subjective variation and they got treated as categorical, the sum of multiple Likert item behaves as a discrete numerical variable, taking on whole numbers. So in that way, we can find out their sum, their differences, their means, medians, and modes. So it can be used both as a categorical data and also as a numerical data. Again, in this connection, there is something I would like to discuss. You might again wonder that if the gap between them are not equal, why are we at all thinking that they should be used as numerical data? Of course, numerical data gives you more option. It allows you to calculate many things like mean, median, mode, standard deviation that you cannot calculate with words like religion, like subjects, etc. But one particular importance of treating this as numerical data is not only that it gives you extra advantage. I'll give you one example. Unknowingly, we use many non-categorical data as continuous. Unknowingly, we use many non-numerical continuous data as continuous data. So I'll give you a very simple example. We usually combine things and add and subtract and find mean, median, mode, etc. So suppose you are doing a research on the pH of blood in certain patients, or you are doing a research on pH of a buffer in a chemistry laboratory. You are making different combinations and finding out the changes in the pH. So pH comes with a value and it's on a scale, say from 0 to 14. So it's a continuous number. pH can have any value. So some pH can be 7.23, another pH can be 6.18, another pH can be 9.12. So pH technically should be a continuous numerical data. But think carefully, what is pH? pH is a negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration. Since it's a logarithm, the pH scale itself is a logarithmic scale. So the gap between pH 1 and 2 is not same as the gap between pH 2 and 3. The gap between pH 6 and 7 is not same as the gap between pH 7 and 8, because they are all in exponential scales. But even without noticing this, we use pH as a numerical variable, as a continuous numerical variable. So there are advantages of using such tricks. Sometimes we can mask almost numerical data as a numerical data, get the advantages of understanding the standard deviation, mean and median, and then again use it as a categorical data and get the advantages of getting qualitative parameters. So Likert scale somewhere falls in between. We can use it categorically to be very theoretically accurate. We can use it as a numerical data also in order to get certain more interpretation, which is not possible with a categorical data. Up to this, is this clear? Because if this is clear, then I'll proceed. Please write Y or N in the chat box if you have understood what I wanted to say. Okay, since most of you have understood, so I'll move on to the next part of the discussion. So we discussed about the Likert scales and the dilemma that we have in statistics, and we understand that it can be used in both ways. There are pros and cons of both methods. Now I come to the question that you were asking in the chat box. How do we represent data? What is the importance of knowing what kind of data you are dealing with? Because representation of the data and the type of statistical test that you use depends on the type of the data. If it is a nominal data dealing with names, then very easy representation can be done with frequency bars using bar charts, proportions or percentages that can be shown with a pie chart. So for example, in a pie chart, we can show the mother tongue of individuals in a classroom. In a bar chart, we can show the frequency at which people use different social media uh, within a particular age range. Each bar can represent a social media like Facebook, Instagram, or Google Chat, whatever it is. So that way, nominal data involving names can be represented very easily using pie charts and bar charts and expressed as frequency, proportion, and percentage. When we are dealing with an ordinal data, we can do all the things that we do with nominal data. Additionally, we can find certain other things. We can find out percentile, median, and mode. So we can find out whether the person lies at the top end of the rank or bottom end of the rank. That is the percentile calculation. We can find out the middle position of the rank. That is the median data. We can find out which rank position has maximum number of people. Like maybe 10 people have together become 7th in the class. So that is the mode data. So percentile, median, and mode can be calculated. What cannot be calculated is, as I told you, mean. You cannot add the rank and find an average rank. That makes no sense. So ordinal data cannot be averaged, but percentile, median, and mode can be calculated with ordinal data. These we will discuss in greater detail in our next session, where I will talk about the statistical test and the softwares. Numerical data can be represented as percentile, as median, mode, and mean, standard deviation, and range. So they can be represented as histograms of percentages, also as box plot, where the box indicates the range of the data, and above and below you can see there are black lines with bars. These are sometimes known as error bars or standard deviation bars. It shows the degree of error or degree of variation of the data in a population. Again, this we will discuss in subsequent portions. So now we come to this very basic question. I told you that when you want to do a medical research or any research for that matter, first you think about a question. After thinking of the question, now you design your study. When you are designing, first you have to choose what kind of study you want to do, and we have already discussed the types of study. Then you have to choose what kind of data you are dealing with. Are you dealing with categorical data like sex, religion, ethnicity? Or are you dealing with numerical data like height, weight, blood pressure? Or are you dealing with a combination of the data? Based on that, you know how to represent your data. And then you also decide what sampling method do you choose. So what is a sample? As I told you that statistics extrapolates in inferences of a small sample into a big population. So look into the diagram given here. Suppose you have a huge sample that can represent the whole population of West Bengal. Out of that, you choose certain people to form your study sample. So maybe out of 1 million people, you have chosen only 2000 people as your study sample. That sample will be analyzed and the inference will be extrapolated back to the population. Now, this inference, this extrapolation will only be accurate if the sampling technique was accurate. To put it more simply, the sample has to represent the population. It cannot be a random corner of the population. And that is why the techniques of sampling are very important. Sampling has to be understood different from the population study. As I told you, population is the complete set. Sample is a subset of that population. When you measure something in a population, it is commonly called a parameter. And when you measure something in the sample, it is called a statistic. These are very rigorous terminologies. Sometimes we use them interchangeably. So for example, the blood hemoglobin level in population is a parameter, whereas hemoglobin concentration is the sample, is a statistic. When you study the whole population, that's quite obvious. Whatever data you get, that whole data represents the truth because you are dealing with the whole population. But when you deal with a sample, you are thinking, you are assuming that your sample represents the population. But actually it will not represent the population. There will be definitely some variation. And therefore, your sample will come with certain margins of error and certain confidence interval. Confidence interval is the accuracy. And these will depend on your sampling technique. The better the technique, the less will be the error and the greater will be the confidence. Population definitely includes all members of the group. Sample is only a small portion of the population that represents the population. So, what is a sampling frame? Sampling frame, to be very simple, it is a list of individual from where you draw the sample. I'll make it very easy for you. Suppose you want to study the stress level in the first year medical students at a particular medical college. We can name a medical college, suppose in Medical College Kolkata. So the stress level of the first year medical students of Medical College Kolkata of a particular batch. So obviously when you define the population like this, the population has become a very defined quantity. So what is the list of that population? You will go to the student section. You will say, give me the name list or the roll number list of all individuals in the first year of this session in MCK. So that list of roll numbers or names is the actual list. Suppose that includes 250 students, but your resources are limited. You cannot study 250 students. You have to actually choose 50 students. So from which population will you choose these 50 students? Obviously from these 250. Then this 250 becomes the sampling frame. The actual list becomes the sampling frame. Then what is not a sampling frame? Anything other than this. The first year students of another medical college like KPC or NRS or CNMC is not your sampling frame because your study involves MCQ. The students of second year and third year in the same medical college is not your sampling frame. The teachers of the first year are not your sampling frame. Now, in this example, it sounds very easy. It's very obvious. But sometimes it may not be very obvious. That is why we have to be very careful about the sampling frame. For example, suppose you did a study on 100 students in your medical college and you published the study under the name stress level in medical students in India. Then your sampling frame was wrong. You did not represent the whole of India through 100 students of one medical college of one city. So obviously there is a sampling error. But the same study can be accurately published if you change the title of the study and say that you are studying the stress level of students in the first year of a Kolkata-based medical college. It becomes a more narrow sample. Then also someone will say that Kolkata has many other colleges. Then you narrow down the sample in one medical college in Kolkata. Then it becomes a very perfect sample. So this is what you mean by a sampling frame, and the sampling frame dictates the population that you are studying. What are the methods of sampling? How do we choose? To reduce error, the sampling must be probability. The probability sampling means everyone has a chance of getting selected. And that is why the small sample represents the whole. But in non-probability sampling, it is not so. You are choosing individuals based on your own convenience. While this is needed in some study, but it does not represent the whole population. So you cannot project the result to the whole population. So let us look into the different types of such sampling. Look into the diagrams. On the left panel, we have probability sampling. One example is simple random sampling. So what is simple random sampling? You randomly pick up certain people from a population. Now this random pickup is not actually random. It is done by some technique. What kind of technique? Suppose everyone's roll number is written at the back of a card. All the cards are shuffled. And then you pick up random cards from the shuffled bundle. That is one mechanism of simple random sampling. A better method is systematic sampling. You see in this example of systematic sampling, starting from one individual, every third individual is chosen. So it can be like, suppose you have 250 students, You want 50 students out of that. So starting randomly at one number, you choose every fifth student that comes next. And that way that will be a systematic random sample. Then it may be a stratified sampling. So what is a stratified sampling? You do a random selection, but after doing the random selection, you further divide them into groups. I'm giving you an example of what it means. Suppose you want to compare people with high blood pressure from people with low blood pressure. So you go to the hypertension clinic and you, using a systematic sampling or random sampling, choose 50 people who are hypertensive. And then you go to the general population and find out normotensive people 50 by a random sampling. So although this is a random sampling, it has been stratified, it has been divided. Or say, for example, you choose 1,000 people at random chance. Then you find out their blood pressure. After finding the blood pressure, you see out of 1,000 people, 300 people are hypertensive, 700 people are normotensive. Then you, by random card selection, find out 25 people from 300 hypertensive and 25 people from the 700 normotensive. And together you have a 50 sample of stratified random sample. Similarly, you can do a cluster sample. Cluster samples are complicated, but a simple example will be like this. Suppose you want to find out the average learning aptitude of students, but you do not want to test all the students. So what you do is, by random card selection, you choose students from every class, but you randomly select a section. Like for class 1, you choose a card and you get B. So you choose class 1B, representative of the whole class 1. You choose class 2A for the representative of entire class 2. And that way you go. So you are choosing a cluster as an individual, and that is done randomly. So these are different kinds of random sampling. Then comes the other methods of sampling that are non-probability sampling. Convenience sampling means you are choosing whom you want. It's as simple as that. And most of your student level research is basically a convenience sampling. For example, you want to study the depression level in medical student. So you forward the questionnaire to your friends in your class and your friends become your sample. Or you are starting a new institution. You want to know what are the basic requirements of people for the institution, but you don't have a client base. So what you do is you forward the questionnaire to your friends through WhatsApp, and therefore they will answer this question and this becomes a convenient sample for you. Then comes voluntary response sample. This means you ask in the whole population who wants to participate. Whoever raises the hand becomes the sample. Then comes purposive sample. You deliberately choose someone and you deliberately do not choose someone. This is particularly important for some disease condition where you want to choose a particular disease and avoid another particular disease. And finally comes the snowball sampling that's commonly used nowadays. Snowball sampling means throwing things at each other. It is like you have created a Google form, you post the Google form on a social media or spread it by WhatsApp, and you end by saying, please forward it to 10 other people. So they will forward it to randomly 10 other people. And that way the message keeps on spreading. And out of that, some proportion will reply you and you get some data. So usually social media statistics are usually collected by voluntary response sampling or by snowball sampling. Obviously, probability sampling is more accurate. It reduces the chances of error and increases the confidence limit. Non-probability sampling is less accurate, but it can be sometimes necessary for doing non-probability sampling because we do not have facilities for probability sampling. So I hope up to this things are clear to you. And if it is clear, please write Y or N. I can see some questions there. Okay, so there are certain questions I should answer. One question is, sir, does continuous variable mean multiple data collected from a single individual over a period of time? No, it is not. Continuous does not mean it is continuing in the person. Continuous means if you plot the data, theoretically, any point on the number scale can give you the data. That means all values are possible. It is a continuous probability function, not a continuous collection of the data. What you are saying, we are collecting the data repeatedly from the same person, that will be called a longitudinal collection of data and not a continuous collection of data. This is where statistics becomes difficult and interesting at the same time. I told you they use colloquial words, but there are technicalities for the words. Can Glasgow Coma scale or Apgar scale be example of certain kinds of data? Glasgow Coma scale, as you can see, is very much similar to the Likert scale. Even Apgar scoring is also like Likert scale. So this kind of clinical scoring scales, like the Likert scale, can be treated as categorical data or can be used as numerical data, whichever is convenient. Now, I will come to a particular question that had remained unanswered. So, I'll try to answer this. Circular variable we did not discuss, so I will discuss with you circular variable. So what is a circular variable? Let us see. When we talk of a circular variable, it means that suppose there are certain data points. There are certain data points that we are using. So as we are using certain data points, suppose this is one data, this is another data, this is another data, this is another data. This is a linear arrangement of data. So this can also be written as a data like 1, 2, 3, 4. But what if the data are taking a circular form? So what do I mean by this circular form? A very basic principle of a circle is that wherever you start, that is the same point where after coming back from there, you will stop. So if you start from here, go all the way around and you will stop at a similar point again. Which means the start point and the stop point will lie very close to and actually adjacent to each other. I'm giving an example of a circular data. Anything that cycles is a circular data. A very good example is months of the year. There is a gap between January to February. That's a gap of 1 month. Similarly, February to March, March to April. And in this way you go on. You can keep adding the gap. But what happens when you gradually approach December? Once you reach December, the gap between December and the first one, that is January, is not necessarily 12 months. It can also be 0 month because soon after December comes January. So thinking in that way, the gap between January and November can be 11 months, but November and January can also be 2 months. Which means when you are dealing with a circular variable, you have to know the direction of counting. This is very true for angle, for latitude, for not latitude, longitudes, etc. So whichever variables are arranged circularly, they tend to be misinterpreted. In biology, this can be very easily understood. When you are measuring cardiac axis, an extreme left axis deviation is also an extreme right axis deviation. So basically, when you get an angle that is lying in the fourth quadrant, suppose, the fourth quadrant is negative to the first quadrant and positive to the third quadrant. It is totally up to you how you calculate the angle. So when you are dealing with such data, simple addition, multiplication does not work. This is the peculiarity of a circular data. We are not discussing circular data today because circular data are very difficult to understand. It requires more statistical expertise. What I am trying to say is avoid circular data whenever possible, because the statistical methods involving circular data are very complex. You cannot use simple rules for measuring circular data. Now, what if you are actually dealing with things like date, month, etc.? They are circular data and that can be included in your study. Now let us come and see one interesting thing. Let us suppose that you are indeed dealing with a circular data. But the circular data that you are dealing with is not involving the whole year. Suppose it only involves this part of the year. Suppose you want to study the rise and fall of the coronavirus epidemic between the months of November to March. Now, November to March is not the full circle. So, November to March can actually be thought of as a series of linear data. So, for practical purpose, when a small portion, when a small arc of the whole circle is taken for the study, it can be treated as a continuous variable. There is no need to treat that as a circular variable. But if in case you complete the circle or near complete the circle, then errors will come up and you cannot use it in the same way as you use a continuous variable. So try to use non-circular variables, and if you have to use circular variable, try to use them categorically, like names of month, or if quantitatively, then for a short period of time, so that it is converted into a linear or continuous data. I hope this is clear to all of you. If this is clear, please let me know. Okay, so the basic thing is, my take home message for the beginning people who are beginning to research is, don't use circular data. So you don't have to understand how statistical methods apply to circular data, but you can read them up, of course, in books and web pages. But the best thing is not to deal with circular data unless you are using a simple categorical data, like a bar graph of different months. That you can do. But adding and subtracting circular data is something very different, and it requires a greater knowledge of statistics. Now, coming to the next part of our discussion, so far we have been discussing about data and the variables. So let us now quickly discuss about, just a minute. So we were discussing about the methods of sampling. We will now talk about a few interesting things which I think you should pay very close attention to. We will talk about central tendency and dispersion. Central tendency and dispersion. So what is central tendency and what is dispersion? This we have to understand. Now, before we go into the discussion of central tendency and dispersion of data, let us understand on chalk and board what it actually means. So, when we talk of central tendency, we mean, can we find out the midpoint of the data, or can we give one value to represent most of the data? That is known as the central tendency. To put this into a very simple language, it is almost like taking an average. So suppose you ask someone, how many cups of coffee do you drink? So the person might start saying that on Monday I took, say for example, 5 cups of coffee. On Tuesday, I took 4 cups of coffee. On Thursday, and accordingly, for the 7 days, he is giving the data. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the average coffee intake in the 7 days of the week. Now, if I ask you, I did not ask you the list of all the things. Tell me on an average, how many cups do you take? So there are different ways of approaching this question. One approach is that you take the actual arithmetic mean of this value and you find that out. That is, you add all of them and you subtract and you divide by 7. I am not doing it right now. Suppose the value comes to, suppose 5.4. That means I take on an average 5.4 cups of coffee per day. Apparently, this gives you a very clear idea that I take something around 5 to 6 cups. But it actually gives a very weird idea, like you have to believe in a 0.4 cup as well. On the other hand, you can arrange this data in an order, suppose in an ascending or descending order. So starting with 3, 4, there are 3 5s, then you have 6 and 7. And you find out the midpoint. Since it is an odd number of data, we have a midpoint. If there is no midpoint, as an even number of data, you find the mean of the middle two. Then that is called the median value. So in this case, we can easily understand that 5 is the median value. So this 5 that we have here, this 5 is the median value. So we can also say that I take around 5 cups of coffee every day. So that encompasses the middle value, and this is also a central tendency. On the other hand, you can also mention the number that is repeated most. Here again, the number 5 has been repeated most of the time. That is called the mode or modal value. So you can also say, mostly I take 5 cups of tea or 5 cups of coffee. So there are different ways of explaining. On an average, I take 5.4 cups of coffee per day, or I take somewhere around 5 cups of coffee per day, or I take mostly 5 cups of coffee per day. A different ways of mentioning the point around which the data is revolving. And this is called a central tendency. So this is the central tendency of the data. Understand that each of these measurements have their own advantages and disadvantages. So if I go back to the example that we were discussing, so what is central tendency? Central tendency, it is also called the measures of center or central location. It is a summary measure. It's a single value that attempts to describe the whole set of data. So what are the different methods of finding central tendency? One is mode. Mode is the most commonly occurring value in the distribution. As in the previous example, the number 5 occurred for multiple times, most of the time. So 5 is the mode. So suppose this is a question for you. Consider the data set showing retirement age of 11 people in the whole years. So these are the retirement age of people. Find out the modal value. And Azhar, you can also turn on the poll. So I think you have got your answer. This does not require a lot of calculations. So let's see. Do we have a poll, Azhar?
Yes, sir, the poll is live.
Okay.
Uh, 72 people have answered. Do we
Okay.
wait or do we publish?
We can publish.
Alright, sir. The results have been published.
So 81% people think that the option is A. 19% think that the option is C. Let us see. Let us get back to the problem and see. So here, there are very few number of data. That is why we can even mentally calculate which number is occurring the most. But in your actual life, research experience, the number of data can be 200, 300, 500, or even more. You cannot actually sit and count which number has occurred for the maximum number of times. So in that case, what we do is we construct a frequency distribution table. You simply look at the data, you choose one number like 54, you write it down, and then you count how many times 54 has occurred. It is 3 times, so you write 3 for the frequency. So 55 has occurred one time, and that way you find out you construct a frequency distribution table. Then the number with maximum frequency is the mode. So since the maximum frequency is with 54, therefore that is the mode. Now think of a hypothetical situation where two different numbers have the same mode. It is possible. Suppose in this one, 54 is occurring 3 times. Let us assume that 58 is also occurring 3 times. Then instead of one mode, it will be a two-mode function, something that we call a bimodal function. So when we use words like Hodgkin's lymphoma has bimodal incidence, it means maximum number of patients in Hodgkin's lymphoma fall in two age groups that are different from each other. So it occurs twice in life in the population. So that is what we mean by a bimodal or polymodal incidence. A very common method is to find out the median. Median is the middle value. So you arrange the number in ascending or descending order, find the middle portion. If it is an odd number value, you will get a midpoint. If it is an even number value, you find the average of the two midpoints. Median, after median, we come to the distribution of central tendency based on the shape of distribution. Now, this is something very interesting. Look into the 3 graphs. The first graph shows that small number of people between 51 to 53 have retired. In this way, the number keeps increasing till the middle age, then gradually drops as the age advances. This is a symmetrical distribution. When the retirement age is more inclined towards the left hand, it is called a positive skew. And when it is on the when it is tilted towards the bigger values, it is a negative skew. Now, what does it actually mean? Look at the values and you will understand. In a perfectly symmetrical curve, the mean, median, and mode will be the same. Whereas, as we go to asymmetrical curve, the mean does not match the mode or median. And so, the central tendencies can give you not only idea about the middle point, how much the mode, median, and mean differ from each other will give you an idea about the skewness of the distribution or the symmetry of the distribution. So looking at the data set alone, without plotting the graph, we can understand whether we are dealing with a skewed data. So here we come to the perfectly symmetrical distribution or normal distribution. Since we are running short of time, maybe this is the last topic I'll discuss, but there is something very interesting you should know about this. You must have opened different statistics books or social medicine books and found out that we discuss a lot about normal distribution. And we know what is the normal distribution. It's a perfect bell-shaped curve where the middle values are most abundant and the extreme values are least abundant, creating a typically bell-shaped curve. Half of the population is less than the mean, half of the population is more than the mean. And the mean, median, mode are all equal because it's a perfectly symmetrical curve. My question is, what is the need of studying normal distribution? How important is normal distribution in the study of natural variables or biological variables? I mean, do biological variables like blood pressure, like hemoglobin, etc., follow normal distribution? And if they do, then why do they follow normal distribution? So you can type the answer in the chat box and I can have a quick look at the answer before I start answering the question. Why is it important to study normal distribution curve while studying biological variables or natural variables? Because you can easily ask this question, that what if the variable I'm studying is not normally distributed? It is randomly distributed. Then what will I do with study of the normal distribution curve? So do we have any answer in the chat boxes? No, acha, I got one answer. Human height does follow this. It provides a range of physiological limit. My question was not that. You were right only. Human height follows normal distribution. My question is, why do nature tend to follow normal distribution? Or what may be a plausible explanation? I mean, no one has taught nature about biostatistics. So why will natural variables be inclined to produce a normal distribution curve? Yes, the answer given by Shaurodipto is a very good answer. Shaurodipto is saying that most average qualities will survive to evolve. If a skew does survive, it becomes the new normal. That's true. Things are naturally selected. Yes, very good. So, because of natural selection, the fittest will survive more and automatically occupy the middle portion. And the extremes from the fit will occupy the other portions. Now, if we find out a systematical or a software based definition of the normal distribution, uh, let us see whether that is equally applicable. Also, there is a question, does this apply to the variables in other disciplines like ecology or toxicology? Mostly it will, not always, mostly it will. And let us see why. Well, the explanation that I'm giving here is not the evolutionary explanation. You have given actually better explanation than me. Now, I'm giving you a more systematic explanation or a statistical explanation. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that things in the nature or random variables are random. They are not normally distributed. So let us assume that things that happen independent of each other, all these variables are like drawing a card out of a pile of cards. So it can take any value and any possible value. But then, if we use a software to generate random numbers and keep adding them, let us see what kind of curve we get. Look at the first curve. The first curve is picking up any one random number. And you can easily see in the first curve, written one random number, there is actually no pattern. Values are fluctuating up and down because any number can be chosen. The moment you choose the function as sum of two random number, you can see there is a pattern emerging. So although individual numbers are random, even in a randomized software which picks up numbers randomly, sum of two numbers starts showing a tendency. Sum of three numbers and four numbers accordingly start showing a different slope of normal variation, a normal distribution. So what does it mean? It means that although independent variables are randomly distributed, sum of two or more independent variables follow a random distribution. Follow a normal distribution. Because most of the biological variable or ecological variables are sum of multiple factors. They are mostly not unique individual factors like electronic configuration. They are results of multiple things happening together. So usually the complex outcomes follow a tendency to follow natural normal variation. Now I have a question to you. There are also many variables in ecology and biology that are not sum of two variables. That can also be product of two variables. Like blood pressure is equal to cardiac output into peripheral resistance. Like V is equal to I into R, the Ohm's law. So when a variable is a product of two variables, how will their distribution vary? This is the question I have for you. A biological variable is a product of two random numbers. Just say. So how will the product of two random number be distributed? Choose your correct answer and we'll have the last log of the day. So can we start a poll and see which answers you choose?
Yes, I'm starting a poll. Poll has been started.
So just asking Azhar and Anujit, how much time do we have left? I think we are already uh, exhausted of the time, right?
Yes, I think we are at the very end of today's session according
Hmm.
to the time.
Okay.
Alright, 64 people have answered.
Okay.
65 now.
So we can check the answer.
Okay, sir. Results have been published.
So 16% think it's A, 54% thinks it's B, 15% thinks it's C, 1% thinks it's D, and 13% thinks it's E. Let us check. Let us go through the question, go back to the question. The question was, a biological variable is a product of two random numbers. So how will their products, uh, how will the product of two randomly generated numbers be distributed? Let us see this by solving this as a problem. I think that way it will be easier. So if we see that sum of two random numbers, suppose R1 and R2, this will follow a normal distribution. The question is, how will product of two random numbers behave? Let's think in this way. Suppose we have product of two random numbers, R1 and R2. Of course, this does not fit into the mathematical relationship that is described by the previous equation. So the answer is it will not follow normal distribution. But what if we take a logarithm of this? Logarithm of product of two numbers is the sum of the individual logarithms. Now, as the numbers R1 and R2 are random, their logarithms will also generate random numbers. So the logarithm becomes the sum of two random numbers, and therefore their logarithm follows a normal distribution. This is the reason why we find in various biological parameters, the logarithm of a parameter like dose is more important than the dose itself. So sometimes logarithms follow better normal function graphs rather than the parameter itself, because probably it is a product of multiple variables rather than a sum of different variables. I hope this portion is clear. So getting back to what we were discussing, in this question, therefore, if a biological variable is a product of two random numbers, then obviously their logarithm will follow the normal distribution. So B is the correct answer. So today we will not proceed any further. We are already at the end of the webinar. I will ask all of you to go through these topics at home. Now we have prepared a handout for you. And as we end, I will also request Azhar to say how to procure this document. Now there is an announcement also. We are trying to create a handbook or ebook for you, which you can use at home. And I would like to edit it as this process of training works, because I can dynamically change the content if new questions are coming up. So we have prepared the handout for today, and that will be distributed to all of you. It will be in a PDF format and you can read it at home. And the graphs and diagrams are same as the one I have used in my PowerPoint. So basically you will get the whole thing in a written format. So you try to read that, you understand that, come up with questions on the next day. Similarly, on the next day also, tomorrow also, we'll give you another handout. And on the third day, all the handouts will be compiled, including the third day's handout, and made into a ebook format, which you can use further for your research purposes. So I think this concludes today's session. And today we have discussed about what is research, what are the methodologies of research, how different sampling techniques can be done, what are the different kinds of variables that we see in biology, and how central tendency of a data can be estimated. In tomorrow's session, we will discuss about dispersion of data, standard deviation, and we will talk about the hypothesis making and hypothesis testing. And with this, tomorrow only, we will actually study how to design a study and do the mathematical calculation. Once we understand the conception of this, on the third day, we will discuss with some imaginary set of data how to write an article. And we will actually practice writing an article on the third day, which you can use for publication. So that was today's session, and over to Azhar.
So I think there are some unanswered questions in the questions tab. If you could kindly take a look.
Sure, I will. Okay, there is one question. Can you please explain what is snowball sampling? Snowball sampling means, suppose I have developed an online questionnaire. I forward that through a social app like WhatsApp to 10 people. These 10 people forward this to any number of other people that they want. Then they forward it to some other people. And all of their responses are collected by a Google form or a common platform. Now, why is this a unique sampling? Because here you see, it is not my own decision that is operating in selecting the sample. I am only selecting the first 10 or 12 people. Then they are selecting the next set of people. Then those third degree people are selecting the fourth degree respondents. And in this way, it is their selection method of whom they forward the message to that is helping in collecting the data. This is known as snowball sampling. And there is another question is difference between purposive sampling and convenience sampling. In convenience sampling, random sampling is not possible. So you choose your sample based on your practical convenience. For example, in your student life, you cannot do a randomized control study. So you think in this way that on Tuesday, there is a teacher who sits in the medicine OPD and who is approachable and friendly. So you decide that on Tuesday, I will go to the hospital whenever that teacher is there, and I will ask that teacher to give me any 10 patients from that day. So here you see no method is being followed. You are choosing a random day, a random room, and random 10 other people. And that is not evenly randomized. So this is convenience sampling. Purposive sampling means you are choosing a purpose. Suppose you are doing a study on patients who have cardiac diseases. Now, because cardiac diseases are more common in the older individual, you deliberately take more sample from the geriatric clinic and less number of sample from the pediatric clinic. This is the purposive sampling. You are purposefully selecting from a crowd so that you get more cases of that type. So, there is another question. The product of two numbers is repetitive addition. Then we can assume it as a sum of multiple numbers. True. But the number with which it is added is also random. Understand this. I'm giving you an example. When we say the sum of three random numbers, It is not the same number that is getting added 3 times. So it is not equal to multiplied by 3. It is three different number added 3 times. So here you cannot treat multiplication as repetitive addition, because multiplication is repetitive addition of the same number. Then the randomness is lost. I hope this answers your question. So Azhar, I think now you can conclude the session and ask about the other kinds of feedbacks that you need.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. So, as today's session draws to a close, I would like everyone to check out the handouts section of the portal, whether it might be the browser or the app. All right. Someone has a question. Does the future webinars will be held in the same time slot? Yes, the future webinars for tomorrow and the day after will be held in the same time slot, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on the very same platform. You will get the joining link to your email. So getting back, yeah. Uh, if Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Okay, because my screen has frozen for some reason. Anyway, so people are asking where to find the handouts. If you are using a laptop or a desktop computer, you can find the handouts just below the chat tab on the very left part of your screen. I'm not very sure about the app version, but there should be somewhere. And if you cannot find it, please drop us an email or contact on the given numbers, and we will provide you the handout specifically.
So are they responding to the polls or the feedback?
So that can be done after we end this session.
Okay. So I think we are good to end the session. Will Onujit like to add anything before we end? Or do you have any other ending words?
Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes.
That was a great session, sir. Thank you so much for elaborating everything for us. I hope the audience and the participants took back something very useful. For any doubts or queries, I have added the numbers to join. And looking forward to tomorrow. Looking forward to a full house tomorrow as well. That's all, sir.
Thank you so much, Onujit. So I think we are good to conclude the session. And um, it will also be great if you participate in the feedback section and let us know not only how you like the session, but also specifically what are your requirements, or if there is something specific that you want us to discuss in the session. So that will help us in planning the future sessions tomorrow and day after. So thank you very much. Um, Azhar, how will they find the feedback? It's only after logging out?
Yes, as soon as they leave this particular session, they will be greeted with the small feedback form.
Okay, okay. So thank you very much. So I think we should call this a day, and I look forward to meet all of you and more participants tomorrow. And tomorrow we'll start with the basics of statistical calculation. Thank you.